Hello, colleagues. This week you'll be working diligently to think about a possible assessment plan for your student. You have been working the last few weeks collecting information about different types of assessments, the purpose for the different assessments, and the pros and cons around the assessments. And so I've included a possible assessment plan for a K-2 student depending on what I might know about them. And so I might begin with some type of interview where I have a conversation with them about what types of books they like to read, if they read at home, if they have a lot of books at home, what are some of their favorite books, and even what types of movies they like, and who are some of their favorite characters, so that moving forward, I might use that information to engage the student a little bit further. And I also always, in my interview process, want to be thinking about the background of the student and what I might already know about them. Sometimes educators will interview parents and have additional conversations about the student depending on your relationship and the circumstances. You want to be careful not to really kind of cross over the line in creating too much diagnostic information for parents, because even though you are looking for information and trying to create a possible instructional plan for your student, you really don't have the capacity to diagnose students. So from that point, I might decide, depending on what I know from the student, really to look at their phonological awareness assessment. I might administer the PAST assessment to really think about their rhyming capabilities. Do they hear, how many sounds can they hear in a word? Do they identify with words that begin with the same sound or end with the same sound? Do they sound the same or different? So that type of conversation that doesn't involve any type of print, so that I can just be able to assess that phonological piece within a student. I may then administer a quick phonics screener to see about where a student is at with their phonics capabilities. Now remember, this is simply a screener. I may have to use another assessment moving forward because it's very limited in the number of items that it gives students. So initially it'll ask letters and sounds, then it will move into the trajectory of phonics skills so that it will include just short vowel sounds, then it may move into longer vowel sounds before heading into inflected endings or vowel diphthongs. So that type of assessment, I may stop that assessment depending on the student based on how many errors they make around the directions within that assessment. So I may sort of pick between these two. I might just give both to collect as many information as possible. So although this contains a type of quick phonics screener with letter identification and letter sound, I may then move into a letter sound identification where a student has an opportunity to respond with a letter name, a sound, or a word perhaps that begins with that letter that they may identify with. Then I might administer a concepts of print assessment. So depending on whether I'm working with the student virtually or whether I'm working one-on-one with a student, it may look a little bit different. So I may have to access a digital resource like Pioneer Valley or Epic that has digital books that the student can sort of engage with, or I may just have the student get a text and then have some parent support videoing the child with some book handling and some types of conversations. So you may need some additional support if you're working virtually with a student. Then I might administer a sight word assessment, like the Dolch sight word assessment, just to see where a student is at with their sight word capabilities, because we know that that can interfere with a student's reading progress because they cannot anchor themselves with enough sight words. And we know that sight words don't follow the typical phonological patterns or phonics patterns, so that this can really interfere with the student's progress. So I want to see what a student is capable with in the area of sight words. And then I want to engage in some type of running record of a text. And so Pioneer Valley has some level A or double A level text, but I may decide to read a certain portion of the text and then ask the student to read 1 or 2 words of the text just to see. They may not be reading yet. They may be just reading the pictures, but do they have the ability to hear some type of pattern or anticipate what word may come next or what's being repeated? So although they may not be a reader, they may be a preschool student, do they have some words like mom or dad or their own name that they may be like to identify with? So where are they in that process? And then a student in kindergarten, first or second grade, this running record, I'll be noting some type of reading behaviors and really recording their accuracy, their fluency, their parsing. Are they able to put words together as I'm taking notes around that particular student? Are they using one-to-one correspondence? Are they pointing with their finger, or have they already omitted their finger as they're working through a text? So that's another place. And then I might use some type of retell or rubric to be able to have them to really assess their comprehension, to see what they can tell me about the story. Do they identify with the main characters? Do they name or state the problem? Do they talk about the resolution? Do they tell the story from beginning, middle, and end? And a rubric will help me to be able to take down some notes and collect some assessment data regarding that. And then I might ask them some additional questions. So either things that happen directly within the text or about the text or beyond the text types of questions. And then depending on where the student's at, I may administer a spelling inventory. So I may do this or I may not. For some of our K1 and 2 students, I would strongly suggest using a spelling inventory to be able to determine what spelling patterns they have mastered, which ones are they still working on, because that will help you with your instructional plan. And then finally, how does the student engage in the writing process? So you might say something to the student like, you're really going to be writing a story and I want to see how you're doing with that. So let's just take 20 or 30 minutes, depending on the age of your student and what's appropriate. And, let's think of a story and then you can write it without prompting. So you're really looking at topic generation, whether a student is able to either create a story from their own experience, a narrative, or whether they write a story about something else, or whether they choose to make an informational story. So that just depends on how you want to structure it. If you stick in the lane of a narrative, you may want to use a narrative checklist or rubric, depending on your student, or an informational rubric at that point. So you want to look at writing fluency, writing formation, or are they telling the story with a picture? Where are they at within that trajectory of the writing process? So this is a possible assessment plan. If you feel as though this addresses a student that you have, you may include that. You could also add an oral language assessment just from conversation. So depending on where you're at, you might just use some type of rubric as you're having a conversation with the student. You could also add that. So depending on who your student is and what assessments you have access to will determine what assessments you'll administer. Now, to support you, I have included all of the resources on your Blackboard page to be able to engage in this type of assessment plan, so that if you don't have assessments, if you don't have access to assessments with you, that you can use this particular plan and use the resources that are there, or you may pick and choose some of the resources that I have provided for you and add some things that your colleagues have added from the diagnostic kit or the assessment share, or from you just accessing additional assessments online. If you have any additional questions or you'd like additional support creating your assessment plan, please reach out through email. We can have a phone call, or we can meet at a later point.